So we're in the middle of configuring NAT so we can connect to the internet. We've gotten our NAT pool defined, and we've defined which interfaces are inside and outside. So now let's carry on with the rest of the configuration. So the next command we will enter will be ipnat, and we're going to say inside address translation because that's what we want to do. So we'll do ipnat inside. And in our case, we are translating the source addresses. You can translate the destinations as well, but we don't want to do that because we want to be able to go to any destination we want to. So we'll say inside source, and now we have to specify which source addresses we want to translate. Now, the easiest way to do this is to use an access list, this list command here. You can use a route map or you can specify it statically. Wouldn't recommend static unless you're doing this in a DMZ or some other type of firewalling scenario. But if you're setting up general NAT on a router for a small business, you'll want to use the access list. We'll set up the access list here in a bit. So we'll do list, and we haven't defined it yet, so we can just give it whatever number we want. Let's say 15. The next part of the command tells the NAT statement which interface to go out of. Now you can specify a pool, which is what we've done, or you can say just NAT out a particular interface, and it uses the IP address of that interface to NAT out. Now in our case, we could have used interface fast Ethernet 00 and not had to define a pool. I took you through the pool configuration process because that is a little more flexible and versatile as you're moving forward with your CCNA and CCNP. However, that's really only useful if you have a static IP address on your outside interface. If this had a DSL card in it, for example, and that DSL address could change, well, you wouldn't want to set up a pool specifying that static address because that address could change. In that case, you would actually do interface DSL 0 or whatever your interface name is. In this case, we did specify a pool. We're going to tell it that it is the NAT pool. And the magic command that makes this all work is this overload command. And that overload keyword inside this command tells the NAT engine to do port address translation as well as network address translation, and allow all of these internal addresses to filter out using one single address or a pool of addresses or an interface, whichever you've configured it to do. In this case, we'll do overload, and if we do overload, we can't specify a VRF or a mapping ID, and again, that's a little more advanced anyway. So you hit enter at this point. Now, a lot of people stop at this point and say, oh, well, I've configured my ipnat, my inside, my outside. I should be able to go out and browse the internet. There's one thing you have to configure to make it all work after this, and that is this source list. You have to configure access list 15 and put in there what addresses you're allowing to go out through this NAT statement. Now, since we're using a source address as part of the list, you can just use a basic access list. So we can do access list 15, we can do permit, and we could actually just say any and say allow anything that gets here to NAT out to this address. And in most cases, that'll work pretty well. That could potentially open you up to a security attack from the outside, meaning that addresses could come in from the outside and potentially NAT back out your address and use your router as kind of a man in the middle, if you will. I always prefer to be very specific with my access list. That's just the kind of quasi-security geek in me coming out. So I'll actually put in here 192.168.0.0 because that will cover all of our internal networks. At this point, you have to put in the wildcard bits, and we've not really talked about wildcard bits other than to say that they are the inverse of the net mask. So where a net mask would be 255.255.0.0, basically the wildcard bits are the opposite of that. So you say, I want you to ignore the first two, and I want you to look at the last two. So that's basically saying allow anything through this access list whose network address starts with 192.168.anything. So now NAT is completely configured on this router. Let's go out, let's write the config on the HQ router. So now people would say, oh, well, I should just be able to go out and ping that address now. Let's go back to our Windows XP client here. Make sure I get the right one. Yes, this is the one I need. So let's go back up here, say ping 172.168.4.10, and we still get the destination host unreachable. A lot of people would say, why do we get this destination host unreachable? I've got my NAT statement set up. It's on the router. I can ping the internet host from my NAT device. And that's because this router here, the 192.168.12.1, which is the RND router, let's verify that that's actually the RND. Yes, 192.168.12.1, which is this router here, says I don't have a way to get there. So we're going to have to put routes in our R&D and sales routers to get back up to the HQ. There's a couple of ways of going about that. So we'll pause here, and we'll pick up in the next video where we distribute a default route into our network.